14. Rodin worked out for longer than usual the following morning. The nightmare had left him feeling drained and the exercises were a struggle, but he pushed through them. He was used to aching muscles. He could force them to summon up a last bit of strength. But this was different. His limbs felt like they belonged to someone else. He had to constantly focus to keep them in line. He could not skimp. He would not break his routine unless there was good reason. He needed his body to be the best it could be, and that meant discipline. Not like Malice was doing. Aiming high was one thing, but you needed the groundwork. Without that you'd fall. Big style. Rodin had heard of a theory, survival of the fittest. He'd read up on it, and was not too surprised that it was initially concerned with animals. It seemed to Rodin that those who most talked about it were still acting like animals. They believed in might and strength over others. They wanted to force their way to the top. They would use physical strength, either their own or that they bought, to get what they wanted. They would eliminate the opposition. Malice and Sporif. And so many others. But that view was far too simplistic. Someone like Voronov understood the subtleties. He would use physical strength when it was required, but he also survived through other means. He would make deals. He would treat others fairly, expecting the same in return. He would act with one eye on the future. He didn't announce his superiority. He let his actions show that. Survival of the fittest was survival of those fit for purpose. Physical strength was but a small part of it. The best paid companions understood this. They became whoever their clients desired. They worked each encounter with subtlety and skill. And they earned the protection of others, their controllers and regular clients, through proving their worth. Those like Malice and Sporif had it so wrong. Others were not the enemy. It was not about eliminating all who stood in your way. It was about looking for the advantage. It was about using what you could. It was about knowing which fights to take on and which to leave. Rodin thought of himself as a survivor. Yes, he was physically more able than many, and could fight his way out of hard situations. But he also planned. He was careful. He didn't agree with unnecessary violence. If others had different lifestyles or ideas, that was their lookout. It was not his concern. But he was used. He was a tool, a weapon. And those wielding him were so often those like Malice and Sporif. He was surviving for himself. But he was also helping those he despised. And that concerned him. He was in control of his own actions, yet by taking these contracts he was ceding this control to others. The fat man and the couple, they were not his enemies, and he had no reason to wish them harm. Yet he had tortured and removed them at the behest of others. Was Rodin no longer fit for purpose? No. He could still work. He could overcome this. Wasn't that too part of survival, overcoming problems? He'd work through it. Work, that was what his body and mind needed. And that was his focus. The next part of the contract. The next part of his investigations. Getting the list from Sporif. That gave him a boost of confidence. That was something he could do. The thought spurred him on, and he felt his body starting to ease into the exercises. He followed this flow, and eventually broke through, sensing his muscles tingling, a sheen of perspiration coating his body. His limbs moved in concert with one another, and he could feel the blood pumping oxygen round his body. The shower afterwards was a well-deserved reward. Then he went to work. He brought up plans of Sporif's building, and figured out the exact position of his room. He walked the street, scoping entrances and exits. He managed to hack into the building's security, taking note of the positions of internal eyes. He checked his tools, planned and prepared. And he trailed Sporif. The man appeared shortly before midday, and visited a few offices. Rodin noted names, found out what he could through his screen, working on the fly. Some names made sense, names connected with supply chains, names that could put him in contact with others. Others would require more research, but Rodin pushed that to one side. He wanted to work fast. Sporif ate at a small cafe, apparently on good terms with the proprietor, and even better terms with the woman working the tables. They disappeared together, returning 30 minutes later. Rodin saw no money change hands. Not that it was any of his concern. A transaction or a mutual arrangement. Not important. The man returned to his room later in the afternoon. Rodin followed, slipping easily past the door security. He set up a remote eye, careful to avoid being seen by any others, and then returned to his own room. He called up the link to the remote eye, and set up an alert. Any movement from Sporif's door and Rodin would know about it. There was nothing to do now but wait. He could do that. He trained for it. He focused on his breathing and held his body still, slowing everything down. They were techniques he'd learnt and developed over the years. If he had to give it a name, hyper-alert meditation might sum it up. When the alert came, Rodin was conscious of it, but his body remained still until he told it to move. One hand reached out, bringing up the image from the remote eye. It was Sporif, heading out for the evening. Rodin watched with care, rewinding the recorded footage a few moments, noting how he twisted his hand on the door, his middle finger pressing down. Extra door security. Not a problem. Rodin already had a different entrance planned. Rodin made a quick check of his tools, especially his belt, then headed out. He walked quickly, arriving at the front door of Sporif's building in a couple of minutes. The building's security let him in. The service stairs were to one side, round the back of the lift. Rodin ran up these, bending his knees with each step, moving with as little noise as possible. Not necessary, but good practice. The stairwell ended at the roof with two doors. One would open onto the lift mechanism. Rodin used the other, picking the lock with ease before finding himself out in the night air, dark under the clouded sky. He couldn't have asked for better conditions. As he walked to the edge of the roof, he prepared. He tugged the harness built into his trousers, then removed the cam from a pocket and attached it, screwing it tight. He slipped the cord from around his shoulders, passing this through the cam, preparing the knot at one end. As he reached the lip running round the roof, he paused, checked his position. Perfect. He tied the cord to a metal bar, after giving it a firm tug. It would hold. Then he slipped over the lip, allowed the cord to take his weight and descended. Fast but in control. He didn't want to be spotted, but neither did he want to make a mistake. He reached the window and took a breath before bringing out the bypass. He switched it on and fixed it to one side of the window, took one of the wires and attached it to a corner, then took the other wire, trailing it around the window's edge, watching the box. When the green light showed, he attached this wire. Rodin used his pick to open the window, easing it wider until he could enter, keeping one eye on that green light. The bypass would keep the security circuit intact. As far as the system was concerned, the window was still closed. The room was larger than Rodin had expected, but maybe that was down to the sparseness of the furniture. One easy chair and small table, a single bed, a food prep area and a storage area built into the wall. That was it. The walls were bare. There was a small screen by the food prep area, something to use while eating. Rodin headed over to it, taking out his screwdriver. In a moment, he had the panel above the screen on the table, and a wire inserted into the top of the screen. This he fed into his own screen, which had routines already running that would fool the wall screen, masking his presence. Sporif came across as organized. He doubted the man would leave details in plain view, but Rodin thought it likely the list would be on the screen somewhere. Rodin started a memory dump while he set up a link. Something that might be useful later. Rodin left the screens for a moment, and made a search of the room. He doubted a paper copy of the list would be anywhere, but there was always the chance. The first place Rodin checked was the food prep area. Lots of storage space, lots of utensils. He looked everywhere, even in the cooker. There was nothing else of interest. He turned his attention to the room's storage area. Lots of clothes, most looking fairly expensive, the only sign of luxury in the room. It made sense. Sporif considered image important, part of the game he played. The room was nothing but a place to rest. Some boxes at the back contained a few blades and other tools, similar to the ones Rodin used. He smiled. The man was not above getting his hands dirty. Rodin appreciated that. He replaced all the tools with the respect they deserved, and continued his search, moving to the bed itself. The mattress was firm with no signs of pick seams. Nothing on the bedframe or underneath. He searched everywhere, even the shower room, but found nothing like the list he was after. As he had first thought, it was most likely on the screen. Rodin had considered the possibility that the list was on a pocket screen, but even if that were the case, Sporif would have a backup. He returned to the screens, watching the progress as the memory copied. There was a great deal of data, he'd feed it through filters later. Then he noticed an alert on his screen, a blinking icon in one corner. Something was not right. He tapped and swiped, searching. His screen was resisting infiltration. As he burrowed into Sporif's system, it was responding by trying to attack his. He set another routine running, aware that it would slow things down slightly but needing to be sure. He sought out the burrowing stream and followed. It didn't originate in the wall screen. It was riding a path that went beyond the building. Rodin followed this path, coming across an address. A dummy, like the ones Rodin used. But it would lead to a genuine one somewhere. Rodin followed. His routine was good, one of Aleph's specials. He hoped it was good enough. There was a second dummy, then a real address. Rodin knew who it would be. He should have seen a greater paranoia in the man. Sporif knew that his system was infiltrated. From wherever he was, Sporif was using his pocket screen to launch a counterattack. He knew someone was in his room. Rodin took a breath. His presence was noted, but he had time. He needed to remain calm. Rodin called up the remote eye. At least he'd be able to see if anyone approached the door. He made his way to the window, peering out. Of course, he could see nothing. He checked the progress on his screen. The dump was almost finished. He increased his screen's security. There was no way he could allow Sporif's machine to burrow into his. Rodin watched the percentage bar on the screen as it crept into the high 90s. Not too long to go. He made himself ready for a quick exit. He'd need to leave no physical sign of his visit. He made sure nothing was misplaced. He cleared up the tiny specks of dust that had appeared when he removed the panel above the screen. He checked the screen again. 99%. Almost done. He ran to the window. Nothing below. He looked at his bypass, calculating the quickest way to remove it. Sporif would probably know where Rodin lived. He might join the dots. But there was nothing Rodin could do about that. He'd face the consequences later. He went back to the screens. The dump was complete. His screen was still resisting the attack. Rodin swiped, giving the burrowing system the technological equivalent of a full-force punch. Not subtle, but it gave enough time for Rodin to disconnect. Forcing himself to slow down with a deep breath, he checked his remote link to the system. It was up and running. He shut it down for now. If Sporif's system was any good, it might be able to burrow through that link too. That was something to think about later. He replaced the wall panel, again clearing up the dust he created. Then he checked the remote eye. Nothing so far. A quick check on the wall screen, pulling up the building door eyes. A figure moving fast towards the door. Sporif. Rodin eased himself out of the window, removing the bypass even as he started to climb hand over hand to the roof. Not the safest way, but the quickest. He untied the cord, ran across the roof and looked down to the front door. There was nobody there. Already in the building. He ran to the stairwell, then went down past the ground floor into the basement. There was always a chance that Sporif was waiting by the front door. Too risky to leave that way. But there was always a back door. Secure from the outside, but easy to open from inside. Sporif might be watching that one, but Rodin would run the risk. The door opened by a set of stone steps, with the familiar acrid tang of urine. There was no sign of movement as Rodin made his way up into the alley, then out onto the street. He wanted the security of his room. But he didn't want to lead anyone there. He set off, walking briskly, stowing the bypass and cord securely. The front of the building was deserted. After an hour's walk, Rodin returned to his room, checked his security, then prepared for bed. He ran through the mistakes he'd made. It hadn't been a clean operation. That annoyed Rodin. He'd let himself down. He hoped the data on the screen gave him what he wanted.